Mute myself.
All right, and people are starting to come in. Hello, everyone. As you're coming in, please let us know where you're tuning in from. What are you baking? Or what would you like to bake in the next few days? Let us know in the chat. Anything that you're excited for, any of that information, just go ahead and put that in the chat. Um, Oh, a reminder to also, when you put something in the chat, make sure it says to everyone rather than to hosts and panelists, because then if it's under everyone, then everyone can see it. If it's only under hosts and panelists, only the three of us can see it. Um, so please chat away, and we'll get started in a few seconds. Um, we're expecting about 40 people, and we're still at 20 something. So we'll wait a little bit to see um, who has arrived. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. What brought you here tonight? What are you baking? What do you want to bake? Hello, Mary from Newburyport, one of my favorite places near in New England. I also love biscotti. Um, Yeah, anyone else want to chime in? Please go ahead. And I'll just go ahead and get started with our introductions. Hi, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. Thanks so much for joining us for this virtual program for the secret history of Christmas baking, recipes and stories from tomb offerings to gingerbread boys. Virtual programs like this are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are very happy to honor his memory with these programs. And I also want to thank our members. I know there are a few of you in the audience this evening, but if you're not a member, please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. All members receive free or discounted admission to our author programs, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and of course, discounted admission, free admission to our house and museum, which is still has all our Christmas regalia, and will for the next couple of weeks. So come and visit us. And if you're interested in membership, you can go to our website or just contact me, and I'll help you out. Now on to our guests. Our author, Linda Raedisch, has been contributing crafts, recipes, and ethnobotanical lore to Llewellyn's Herbal Almanac since 2012. She's the author of The Old Magic of Christmas and the Lore of Old Elfland. Our moderator, Erin Bertram, is the Associate Director for Education at the Mark Twain House and Museum. Now, during this event, we encourage you to have a conversation with each other in the chat. If you have a specific question, and you can ask your question at any time, please post that directly into our Q&A section. Again, you can ask that at any time. As soon as it occurs to you, put that in the Q&A. So that is all the housekeeping from me. I will turn this over to Linda and Aaron, and sit back and enjoy.
Thank you, Omar. Welcome, everyone. I'm getting hungry looking at all the things you're baking. Glad to see someone else is working on those gingerbread blondies. Well, I'm so excited to talk to Linda tonight. This book is an absolute treat. I had a hard time reading straight through it because I kept like flipping through it and seeing things and having to go back. And I was mentioning to Linda before we started that I was marking recipes in it to try, and then I just stopped because I would have just had a bunch of post-it notes in here. So what this book is, I mean, it's got the title, I think, The Secret History of Christmas Baking. I think one of the things that makes it really great is it's a deeper, longer history of Christmas baking than people might be expecting. And we're going to kind of talk about how long the history is of some of these things. But it's available, I believe, through the museum store. It's a narrative and a history of some of these things, but it is full of recipes and full of the crafts that go along with them. So it's I was excited about the book anyway, and then when I got it, I was like, oh, this is actually a much richer experience than I was expecting. So I wanted to start, Linda, just by asking you, as someone who had written about Christmas before, what made you want to delve particularly into these issues, and sort of how did you go about tackling some of these very old recipes?
Well, as far as the issues, I didn't know really that I about the issues that I was going to have to deal with when I got the idea. At first, I thought I would write a book about Christmas markets, like the history of the old European Christmas markets, mostly in Germany. Um, but that was during the lockdown, and I thought, okay, that's my excuse that I can write about Christmas markets without having to go to them because I can't afford to fly, you know. There's sometimes you can like do a whole Christmas market tour if you have the money. I don't have the money. I've been to Germany a lot of times, but never at Christmas time. We always go in the summer. Um, so I thought, this is time nobody can go, so I could write this sort of a virtual, and then how to make your own Christmas market at home and put crafts and recipes in there. But then I thought, looking at the recipes, well, gingerbread in itself is enough for a book because there's so much going on there. But then if you're going to talk about gingerbread, you have to talk about marzipan because that goes into the German gingerbread. And so why not just kind of take all of Christmas baking and try to do that? And it was overly ambitious. And I really feel like I'm just scratching the surface of each of these topics. I didn't know what I was, you don't know what you don't know going in. So it led me down a lot of roads I didn't know I was going to go down. And I'm glad it did. And I'm glad I did. And I think some people may be surprised if like uh, the marketing for it. If you look it up on Amazon, it's got, I think, like hands around, like hands with fingerless gloves around a mug of cocoa and spices, and it look warm and cozy, and everybody reads a different book. I think a lot of people take different things away. You're the first person to mention earlier the candy corn. Nobody's mentioned that before. But some people, oh yeah, it's like Christmas baking, and then other people, I was afraid people would read it and be like, I never want to bake another Christmas cookie again. This is horrible.
You're right that it is just from the introduction, I was sort of like, oh, this is going places. This isn't shying away from the sort of real histories of colonialism that are part of this. But also, I find myself thinking of the way that people get upset they get upset seeing a person of color in medieval Europe, but not a potato, when the potato is the anachronism of person
Yes.
of color. Um, and what is really interesting to me about this, and I think uh, just kind of reoriented where I think about the origin of a lot of this is the deepness of the history of many of these things, um, in particularly that first 1,000 years after the Common Era begins, that the sort of deeply old medieval origin of some of these things that are pre even some of the most basic things. This isn't sort of like a spice issue. This is what sweetener are you using for things. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about uh, the kind of baseline ingredients that some of the earliest recipes have that we might not necessarily assume or think of when we go to do Christmas baking.
Well, you wouldn't have had in Northern Europe, you wouldn't have had much wheat until the Roman era, until the Romans started making their way up and started trading. Most of the Romans' flour actually came from Egypt. Egypt was considered the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. When we think of Egypt, we think sand. But actually, the Fayum, where the Nile comes out and it fans out into the Mediterranean, that was a very fertile area, and Egypt was one of the places that wheat was first grown, way back. It was first domesticated way back in, coming out of the New Stone Age, or so so wheat, before the Romans brought wheat into Northern Europe, it would have been barley and rye, which is a lot heavier. The Egyptians, and then passed on to the Romans, yeast, which they did not have up in the north. It's a lot easier to grow yeast where it's warm than it is to, and there's nobody really knows what came first, bread or beer.
Mm.
I think because beer has been pushed back to like around 10,000 BC. I think it could be both. I think there's always been people always want to get drunk. I mean, you look at like jailhouse hooch. Even when there's no way to have alcohol, people manage to make alcohol. But also, if you've got bread in a warm climate, the bread's going to go, it gets a little wet and then gets a little funky, and ooh, this gives a bit of a buzz. But we're back in Europe. So what actually, when you say those early recipes, where do you
Well,
mean?
well,
Because
that's
it's
sort of
different.
the question. And that's the thing, that it's not just the timeline that this book pushes, it's the geography of a lot of these things. You bring up Egypt. Egypt kind of bookends this
It does. It really
the
does.
book,
And in fact,
and
when
the use of sugar in particular, and the growth of sugar in Northern Africa was fascinating too.
yeah, so like some of the earliest Christian Christmas recipes are also from Egypt, because Egypt was one of the earliest, the Coptic Christmas, the earliest Christmas celebration, because I think Egypt, not sure if it's Egypt or Ethiopia, either one was one of the first actual, the entire Christian kingdom.
Mhm.
So you can even trace the celebration of Advent to ancient Egypt, because at that time and through the Middle Ages, where it was known as St. Martin's Lent, it was a period. Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas, was a period of fasting, sexual abstinence, and that goes back to the early Egyptian church. And also from that comes, because it was a period of fasting, you're not supposed to be eating fatty things, not eating luxury foods. But if you were sick, you could eat medicinal foods. And medicinal foods in those
Yeah,
days included almonds, candied peel, sugar. Most important, sugar was originally considered a medicinal food, and you'd have just a little bit of it. You would get it from the apothecary, not from, you wouldn't come home with a big bag of sugar. You would come home with a little twisted paper cone of sugar.
yeah. The idea of getting a prescription for
Mm-hmm.
sugar in here was really wonderful. And that, I mean, I think what was so cool about the book is that there's these things that are so deeply familiar to us, particularly in the US and Western Europe, that we think of as sort of fixed in form and time and geography. And so many of these recipes in here, and even fixed in alignment with religious and ethnic groups. And so many of the recipes in here sort of have started in places and moved around with people and moved around the calendar. We brought up the candy corn. Linda talked here about how sort of the first candy corn packaging showed Santa dropping it down the chimney.
Because
Um,
it was supposed to be a cheap alternative to marzipan, which
mhm,
being made with almonds, it was a little more expensive. And if you were, living on a farm in the American Midwest, you probably couldn't afford that. But do something just with corn syrup, and yeah, you've got a Christmas gift to put in the stocking.
yeah. So I think that was what was really interesting to me, was sort of watching some of these recipes evolve over time and shift ingredient and place and all this kind of stuff. Are there recipes in here where I mean, you mentioned sort of the loss of recipes in your own family because people didn't write them down. Are there recipes that we functionally can't reconstruct because the foodstuffs have changed or just have become unavailable at this point?
I think pretty much, because you can still, I think you could probably still get like einkorn wheat, the
Yep.
early wheat. So you can, well, we don't know. I have a recipe for Egyptian tiger nut cakes
Mhm.
in the book, which the book, An Egyptian Herbal by Lisa Maniche. She's a Danish author. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name right. She has just she sketched sort of the framework for what tiger nut cakes were, and I decided to expand on that and thought, okay, if you were trying to make a Lebkuchen like, which is a German gingerbread recipe with only ingredients available in ancient Egypt, how would you make the tiger nut cake? So I kind of went with that. We don't know exactly. Yeah, it's hard to actually recreate the ancient Egyptian recipes, but they did make fancy breads. And one of which still is a staple of the Coptic Christmas are loaves, patterned loaves of bread with the three, I think 4 dots on it that they hand out at the Coptic Christmas Mass. But most of it, I think, it's not so much that we don't have the ingredients, although I was not able to find citron this year. When my mom was baking Lebkuchen and Stollen, she would always put chopped citron, and she would get coarsely chopped citron in a little flat plastic container in the baking aisle. She would mince it further, and I cannot find that this year. Yeah. So, but I think if you can get the ingredients, but then we were not sure, because when you look at the old recipes, the further back you go, the vaguer they are.
Yeah, there was a gingerbread recipe that you noted didn't note ginger, and you
there's no
sort of said
ginger. Yes.
maybe they thought it was obvious to put the ginger in.
Yeah, or had ginger lost, kind of like ginger and pepper, they sort of lost their meaning. Like we have all kinds of Christmas cookies, especially in Scandinavia, in Germany, that have pepper in the name, and there's no actual pepper in there.
Pepper.
So did there used to be pepper and it got too expensive at one time and started making without it? Or did pepper also might have been, and maybe ginger
with
spice.
A lot of spices in it?
Yeah. Spice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking before, and I mean this not in a, like, not to say the recipe design is bad, but for the first half of the book, you can pretty much lay in a dry pantry of about 12 things. And if you have butter and eggs and sugar, you can make lots of these things. And what I really noticed, and I wonder if you can talk about some of your favorites, is the way that, yes, there's different proportions in all these recipes, but the baking techniques, especially in German baking, the techniques and the technology, the tools, really make the difference. So I wonder if you could talk about some of the different, methods and processes of making some of these foods.
Mm-hmm. Well, the candied peel is labor intensive, because you have to, you take your orange and your lemon and you cut off all the flesh, take the good fruit out and eat it, hopefully, and then take as much of the white out as you can. Then it's boiling in salt, and then draining it and boiling it again with sugar, and it's a lot of work. So once you've made a batch of candied peel, I want you to be able to use that in several different recipes. And yeah, that's when you need to get that right, because if you don't, it can be bitter. But if it looks this year, actually, because I've been busy doing interviews for the book, I did not actually make candied peel this year. So in place of it, I've just been putting freshly grated orange and lemon zest in those recipes, and it still tastes good. So I'm all for shortcuts if you want to be super, but then again, so if you're a professional Stollen baker in Dresden, Germany, and you want that official stamp, it's got to be real citron in there. And they have like the Nürnberger Lebkuchen and the Dresdner Christstollen, they have strict rules they have to follow. Each bakery can have their own recipe, but usually, because these are all, they still have guilds. They're called, Verband is the guild, and which goes back to the Middle Ages, and they had strict quality and, enforcement. And if you were not up to, using the ingredients that you were, but you couldn't be cutting it with sawdust, because that would not cut the mustard.
Is Stollen a DOP? Does it have a protected origin status like other foods?
Yes. You can't, you can't call it, I mean, you can call it Stollen, but you can't call it Dresdner Stollen from Dresden unless you're baking in Dresden or somewhere nearby where it's accepted. And I think if people start complaining about the quality of your products, then the Dresdner Stollenverband is going to come after you too. And also, you're not supposed to reveal the secrets. So I watched, they have a nice video, the Dresdner Stollenverband on their website, and they have all the ingredients laid out. I'm like, okay, I'm going to know what all the ingredients are. And they're, like flour, butter, there's special kind of cheese, spices, sugar. It's like, what? Go back to the spices. It's just they're already ground up. We don't know exactly. We know it's cardamom because you can smell you can taste the cardamom, like it comes out through the nose. You taste more with your nose, from the back of your nose, than you do with your tongue. But we don't exactly know what, and they're not supposed to reveal them. Same thing with the Nürnberger Lebkuchen. You're not supposed to reveal.
Yeah, and thinking of the techniques and the way that some of these things were made, you can really tell the craft. I think one thing that's interesting, like I love Louisa Weiss's classic German baking, and I've done a lot of the stuff out of there. And one of the things you notice, obviously, a lot of honey used, and
Yes.
that things tend to be drier. And I was always under the impression sort of they're dry, but they're intended to be dunked in coffee and tea. But one thing you pointed out with some of these is that they are intended to come out crisp and then soften up over time. So
Yeah.
can you talk a bit about and also just the idea of a speculoos cookie the size of an American Girl doll that you could dress up
Yes, right.
before you ate. I was reading that out loud to my coworkers this
Mhm.
afternoon. So this idea that like these things are and not we think of a fruit cake as this is the thing you feed for a long time, but there was a lot of long-lived baked goods in this book.
Yeah, even when my mom was a kid in Germany, her her mother, she worked full time, so she was not a big baker, but she would make braune Lebkuchen, brown gingerbread,
Mhm.
and in I think in star shapes, and put a hole in it. And they were pretty hard when they came out of the oven, but then they would hang them on the tree. And by the time the tree came down around New Year's, they would be soft enough to eat. And she would make a gingerbread house also, I think, with the same recipe. And when the chimney fell in, then it was time to eat the house. But because when the apartment was, warm and humid enough, it would absorb the Lebkuchen would absorb that, and the chimney would fall in. And okay, now we can eat the house.
Having heard just yesterday of some friends of friends who'd attempted to bake a gingerbread, make it from scratch this year, and let's just say that the chimney fell in right away.
Right away.
Um,
I think, well, the kids you get, really the gingerbread is too thin.
yeah.
The one that I make, it's a lot thicker, and more, I think like a quarter inch thick.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really not hard to put together.
Yeah.
So
This
yeah.
this apparently had come out quite soft, and the walls came tumbling down quite
Down.
quickly, which
I
is why
hope
sometimes
I hope
we
no
go to
one was
grant house.
hurt.
No, it was we're reporting live from the scene. Um, what I thought was really interesting is like we tend to think about and especially at the Twain House where we talk about the way the Clemenses traveled to Germany in the 1870s and the letters that Mrs. Clemens writes about seeing old German women eating soup at their Christmas tree stands and seeing everyone get their Christmas tree and all the food that they ate. They brought home a lot of those traditions. So I think if our the folks in this program probably when they think about American Christmas traditions and their history, they think about the German history, and there is a lot of this in here, specifically tied to the industries of certain towns and regions of places that have been German. What I think is really neat is that this sort of pulls everything back. What is the history of those things that became German Christmas traditions? So even if you're very familiar with German Christmas and its sort of more recent history, there's a lot in here that takes you kind of much further back. And I think one of the really interesting things you talked about St. Martin's Lent and what could and couldn't be eaten. That some of these things don't just become Christmas things when ingredients become available. They travel through various religious traditions and through the Reformation, um, becoming viable at certain times and not at others. But there's a really strong tradition of Jewish and Muslim bakers in this book. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the recipes that come out of sort of Southwest Asia into Europe and evolve within those cultural traditions before they become Christmas things.
Well, that the medieval gingerbread recipe that we talked about that had no called for no ginger,
Mhm.
that was made out of breadcrumbs that were stuck together with honey, and that is very similar to a very old Jewish recipe, the lekach. So that kind of led me down that road. There's even a part where the gingerbread seems to merge with challah, like it had the gingerbread that you could dress up as an American Girl doll. Actually, it's not gingerbread; it's a duve kata
Mhm.
in the Netherlands, and that's it's a rich yellow yeast bread that's baked in a special shape, and it seems to have a lot in common with challah. And the so when Cologne was the farthest northern spot in continental Europe that the Roman Empire reached, and there was a Jewish settlement there in the 300s AD already. So if they were descended from people coming from the Mediterranean, they had a richer baking tradition. They had flour. They knew how to bake with yeast, and then they're coming up into this, you know, barley and rye flat griddle cake zone. The same thing would have been happening like around Nuremberg and Augsburg. Augsburg was the terminus of one of the Roman roads. So we know that there was intermarriage. I think it was probably like Jewish men coming up to trade and then marrying native women, and probably seeing, if it's a special day and it's like, honey, what's that flat cake? Let me see if we can do better.
Jazz that up a little. I love
Ideas.
I
Yes,
love
yes.
thinking of it as the flat griddle cake zone of Northern Europe.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and you sort of touch on, I mean, I think anyone who's interested in this book is going to expect to learn, oh, the spice road and trade and all this kind of stuff. But you get into much more kind of fine detail about how things diffuse through society. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of one of your favorite kind of rabbit holes you went down, tracking down how an ingredient moved from place to place.
Well, sugar was interesting because sugar comes all the way. It was first domesticated in New Guinea. And sugar is very happy growing in New Guinea because it's warm and moist. And there were several different kinds. Because there still are. Some they would use to feed to the pigs, and also in Southeast Asia. It's spread, and others they would use to build houses with the cane. And some had an extra sweet juice in it, and you'd suck on that, and that was nice. And so it was like sort of in moderation they had sugar, and then it spread from there to India, and it was in India that they started semi-refining it. And you can still a coworker of mine, she buys Indian rock sugar at the Indian grocery store. So it was
Mhm.
a small cottage industry, little bits, and like the word jalebi, which is a syrupy kind of sweet in India. Is That's the Arab, I think comes from the Arab word for it, and then the Arab word gives rise to our julep, as in mint julep.
Huh.
So it kind of went. So from India, Arabs adopted sugar refining, but most of the Arab world was arid, and it was a challenge to grow sugarcane. In order to grow the sugarcane, they had to develop high-tech irrigation techniques because it's got to stay wet. And from that to the processing, you can't just leave the sugarcane standing in the field or lying in the field. It's got to be harvested when it's ripe and immediately processed. So that then spread throughout the Mediterranean. The Arabs were spreading it, and they were the ones who figured out, if we're going to really make a go of this, we kind of need slave labor because it's a lot of work. And then once Europeans moved into the Caribbean, then sugarcane was once more in a climate where it does very well. And then it all ballooned from there because they could grow more sugarcane. The more sugarcane they could grow, the more slave labor they needed. And that was kind of the end of the world, so to speak, for a lot of people. And it still
Mm.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, and it pushed back. So for me, thinking about, I was thinking about the fact that enslaved laborers are sought out from specific places because they have specific expertise. Like that happens with rice
Mhm.
growing, and knowing in particular that you mentioned that many of the enslaved people who are laboring in the Caribbean in such an intense thing that sort of every acre is being used for sugar, and New England saves itself economically by feeding these populations. Knowing that those skills were then brought, I think the book does a really good job of emphasizing. Um,
Yeah, most people don't realize, because I know indigo also,
yep,
they were they were brought because they were skilled. Most West Africans were already skilled in growing sugar
yeah,
and growing indigo. And so yeah, it's not unskilled. I don't think there really is anything such a thing as unskilled
nope,
labor, but this
yeah,
was highly skilled labor.
yeah, and I think that the book does such a good job of emphasizing that how much someone is compensated for their work has very little to do with skill, and that in fact enslaving people was not in any way justified by them being unskilled. It was justified by profit motives.
Mhm.
And that you make that clear. That was the first sort of like on page 2 or something. I was like, good, oh, this book is going to these places, and you really dive into some aspects, especially of Dutch colonial history, that are, I mean, some of it might be familiar to people, but the actual violent history of Dutch sugar production and I can't remember, is it nutmeg production?
Yes, the
With
bond.
exact like these
I
things
like
are
to
really important.
I like to specify the Dutch East India Company, because
Yeah.
I feel like the Dutch, I don't want to give the Dutch a bad rap. Um, I'm not Dutch. I don't live in the Netherlands, and I felt like I was coming down pretty hard on them. So it was the actions of the Dutch East India Company, and most Dutch people still to this day don't know what all went on there, but a lot of them are, and especially in cooperation with Indonesian people, because a lot of Indonesians now live in the Netherlands.
Mhm.
They're bringing these stories to light. I had never heard of the Banda massacre,
Yeah.
which was the Dutch were there and trying to protect themselves. They didn't want, that's where the nutmeg was grown,
Mhm.
where it had been grown for centuries. And they wanted a monopoly on the market. They didn't not want the Bondanese selling it to anybody else. They didn't want any seedlings going out. They wanted strict control. And because the Dutch East India Company were in the minority, they were very paranoid. And when they felt threatened, they killed like half the population on that particular island. And yeah, so the Dutch had a real stranglehold on the spices. And the ironic thing is that the biggest producer of nutmeg today is Grenada.
Mm.
So yeah, how that these things, they always get out all the secrets. Yeah, it never pays because yeah,
Something always travels, knowledge
it's
and
yeah, if it's
and
something that
see, but
people want, and they were not, but the Dutch, um, before the Dutch, there were the Portuguese trading, but even they weren't before Arab traders had been going to the South Sea, to the Indonesia and Southeast Asia to get the spices and trade them. The Chinese had been, trading all around. So it was really only Europe came on the spice scene very late.
yeah.
Everybody already knew. The ancient Egyptians, they burned a lot of, they ate cinnamon, they burned cinnamon. They didn't know where it came from. They probably
That
got
was
it.
really fascinating. Talk about
Yeah.
that a bit more. That was
Well,
cool.
they got things from the land of Punt. We're not sure where the land of Punt was. It was probably Somalia, and probably the traders who supplied Egypt with a lot of their spices didn't want the Egyptians to know where it was either, because they wanted their corner of the market. They wanted to be the only ones supplying it. So it was secret for a long time, because if you're a spice trader, you don't want anybody getting in on the game there. So yeah, even today we don't know much about cinnamon. There's true cinnamon and there's
And then there's
cassia.
cast.
And
Yeah.
true cinnamon grows only in Sri Lanka. And it will say like Sri Lankan cinnamon, that's true cinnamon. But if you get
Hmm.
like a McCormick bottle of cinnamon at the grocery store, that's cassia,
Hmm.
which is a Chinese plant.
Hmm.
And I'll admit I can't really taste the difference. I've heard that the Sri Lankan cinnamon, the true cinnamon, has maybe better health effects. But most of us have just know cassia as cinnamon.
Yeah.
Cassia would have been what the Emperor Nero burned on his wife's funeral pyre. He like burned like a ton of cinnamon on her
Well, and there
funeral.
was, you mentioned the thing about that the phoenix supposedly made their nest out of cinnamon so that
Mm-hmm.
when they burned, it would smell lovely, which is just so considerate.
Yes, yes, isn't that
And
nice? Before they
it's
rise again from the ash or the cinnamon ashes. And
so fun.
I recently learned this is the problem with writing nonfiction is that you finish your manuscript, you send it off, you're so confident you've done all your research, and then as soon as it comes out, you start hearing things like, I wish I'd known about the Twains going, the
Yeah.
Clemenses going to Germany. I didn't know that. I would have like, gone down that trail.
Yep.
I also recently heard that in Denmark, if a man is not married by age 25, his friends will douse him in cinnamon. They'll tie him up and they will just pour cinnamon all over him. Yeah, I would have loved to put that
Yeah. But there's,
in.
and it's great because there's so many things in here where you're like, here's a weird thing. No one has any good explanation for it. And I
For
love
it.
it. Where you're just like, you don't try to explain. You're just like, this is a weird thing and we can't know why.
Well, the possible explanation for the dousing young Danish bachelors in cinnamon might be that the only reason not to be married is maybe if you were a spice trader, because you're
Got it.
traveling all the time. You haven't had time to find a wife. So maybe it's saying, hey, well, what are you, a spice trader or something? You're not married yet.
That's
That's
a
the
deep cut.
theory. And it is, I also came across a reference to an Arab writer describing a Viking spice market in the during the Vice around 700 AD. There were a lot of Arab scholars traveling around. I know like our the one really good account of a Viking funeral comes from an Arab writer. So this was another writer. He just happened to, I think somewhere, he was based in Constantinople and went a little north and found the Viking spice traders at work and, saying what they had. I would have loved to include
Well, because you
had it there.
mentioned, is it okay to be eating this particular Christmas spiced thing near a Viking settlement? Because would they have had it?
Oh, it was
Maybe they would.
the marzipan
Oh, it was
potatoes.
the
Yeah.
marzipan potato. Well,
Yeah,
they wouldn't have thrown a potato.
we were on the trail. You can walk this long trail along the Donavik. It's called the Danish the earthworks that defended the town. And so my family and I, when it's a German thing that like you bring snacks wherever you go. You don't leave the house. If you're gonna, be gone for more than 2 hours, you have to bring snacks with you. So we stopped in front of the Viking village before we went in to have marzipan potatoes. And I think my uncle said, should we be eating potatoes because potatoes are not, the Vikings didn't have potatoes. And one of us said, well, these are marzipan potatoes. So that would be, if they were getting potatoes, they would have to be marzipan potatoes
If
because
they
they
could
didn't
have
have potatoes.
conceptualized potatoes.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and the marzipan potatoes are one of the things where you sort of say, if you want to start somewhere, like the actual craft and modeling of these is, I mean, can you make a lump and make it look like
Right.
potatoes? There's some, I mean, nothing in here I think requires, I mean, you're not asking us to laminate dough or we're not making panettone, we're not doing, a lot of that kind of stuff. Um, and I know people can get intimidated by long lists of ingredients. And I will sort of assure you there
Mhm.
were very few things, at least in a New England kitchen, that I didn't have or couldn't get pretty easily. But if people wanted to start with some of the recipes in here who aren't super confident in complex baking projects, which ones would you suggest they start with?
The homestyle Lebkuchen,
Hmm.
which is my mom's recipe basically, but she used dry lemon peel and I use fresh lemon zest. So
Hmm.
you do it all in a pan and then you cut it into bars or squares And that's one of my favorite ones to make, and I experiment a little bit with it. Like we have a couple friends who either are allergic to or have a psychological problem with cinnamon. So you can leave out the cinnamon. She doesn't put ginger in hers. My mother doesn't put ginger in hers. So, but if you don't want to do cinnamon, you could put ginger in instead of cinnamon, because it has allspice in it. And allspice is not all spices. It is a specific spice. It's the berry of a tree that grows only in Jamaica, or not only in Jamaica. I think it's native to Jamaica, but only in the Caribbean. The Mayans used it, but they may have traded in order to get it from the Caribbean. And it kind of has, it smells a little bit like cloves, a little bit like cinnamon. If you have like only one spice to put in your pumpkin pie, allspice will probably get you there. So the home style Lebkuchen, one of my favorites is Linzer Törtchen, little Linzer tarts. And I have you piping my marzipan around. I should post a picture of the ones I made last year, because my piping skills are not good. I really hate piping, especially. It's one thing if you're piping with like a whipped cream frosting, but this is sticky.
Where you have to push.
Stuff in the cone. Yeah. And then it backs up, and there's like all that. There's always stuff that gets stuck between the bag and the point,
And the
and
ring.
then you have to eat it. Yeah, in the ring, you have to eat it. You have no choice. So what I did one year, this year, I rolled the marzipan out and I cut it into crescent moons, and I just put a crescent moon on top of each on the jam. But if even that is too much, you could just make the Linzer dough, roll it into balls, and then just as you make a pinch pot, you make a little hole in the middle and you fill that with raspberry jam. And you can skip the marzipan completely, and that makes a very nice thumbprint cookie.
Nice. Yeah, I was thinking, because I always struggle with Christmas baking, where I read a recipe and I was like, oh, you live in a place where room temperature in December is like, I have a wonderful
Mhm.
cranberry cake that is just leavened by sugar and butter and egg. And you whip all the eggs and you're supposed to put all this soft butter in. And it is almost impossible for me to get butter as soft as they want
Oh,
it. And so many of these
yeah,
seem like things that can be cooked and baked in a sturdy New England kitchen where it's going to get warm when you bake, but it's not necessarily
not before. Well, like
not before.
the Stollen, and I don't have Knussbärchen in this recipe, I don't think, but I know in the Stollen, you cut the butter in. The butter, you start with cold butter and you cut it in with two knives.
Like a
So that's
biscuit.
good. That's
Or,
good for the New England kitchen. Yeah.
yeah. I do want to show one of my favorites. I mean, this is also just a really cool book for learning about Eastern Europe and sort of really little pockets of ethnic groups that have been absorbed over time or been frankly colonized over time and repressed. Um, but there's a real sweet babe of a cookie in here. And is it pronounced strokey? Is that how you say it?
I think it's Shroki. I speak a little bit of Czech, which is similar. I don't
Yep.
speak Sorbish, but yeah, I think it's Shroki.
Yeah. So you describe them as blobby raisin-eyed bird buns. And I just want to actually show people at home what these little darling things look like.
Isn't that
They're
attractive?
it's so fun. But I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is because I often will shy away from molded or modeled cookies and stuff like this. And I was like, this looks like a thing. There are a lot of recipes in here where if you have a small helper in the kitchen, it seems like they are accessible. And with these, even if they come out looking a little odd,
Bad.
that's sort of the whole point of it. Like this isn't you don't have to be able to model marzipan peaches to do some of these. I like that they're
I mean,
really homespun things.
the people who model those marzipan peaches, like who
Mhm.
work at the Niederecke company in Lübeck and make, they make the Holzen Tor and all kinds of scenes and perfect, it looks real except it's tiny peach. Those people, they would have decided probably around age 16 whether they were going to go on to college or they were going to enter a trade. And they
Yep.
decided to enter a trade. And they've probably been modeling marzipan peaches since teenage years. They
They've
had to
made thousands of them.
apprenticeship And yeah, they didn't just like, oh, I think I'll get a summer job making marzipan fruit. No,
It's
it's
sort of the Italian or Chinese grandma that can make dumplings or ravioli really well because they've made it for years and stuff like that. But I just thought those were a really great little like, and I mean, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven ingredients, all of which I have in the kitchen right now.
I would recommend watching the video that I reference
Mhm.
in the for that recipe and seeing the professional Sorbian baker making them, and maybe you can get closer to his all are also, you know, blobby,
Yeah.
but they're a little bit more professional looking than mine. Mine
Well,
are.
and that's the other thing. Like the historian in me loves, I should say the historian in me, that's all my job is. I love that there's footnotes and to tons and tons of videos and places where you can see some of these things being made. They're all right there at the bottom of the page. Like, and there's also some real gems dropped in the footnotes of your commentary on some of these things.
Yeah, especially the footnotes I was most proud of and had the most fun making were the like the American candy ones. Like I have
Yep.
one where I talk about Peeps and how I was
Yeah.
hoping that Peeps, that was maybe a Sorbian immigrant who started making Peeps because they look similar to the
Mhm.
Sroki. That was not the case, but then that kind of led me off into marshmallow. Our marshmallows that we eat now are not made from the plant, but originally it was made from the milk of the
Mhm.
marshmallow plant. So
Uh,
yeah, there was the cool, just the history of our candy, of American candy is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's almost always an immigrant story. It's almost always
Yep.
a recent immigrant.
Well, that talking about George Washington's chef and baker and all of these kinds of
Mhm.
things, and that I mean, if you're looking, there's very little English Christmas history in here, and it has its own complex relationship to
Mhm.
Christmas. There's sort of some fruitcakes which you talk about being similar to some that would have been made, but a lot of times it was, oh, thank goodness someone from a German speaking area immigrated, and now we'll get good good baked
Yeah,
goods.
the kind of center of gravity for this book was really Germany and Central Europe.
Hmm.
And then of course, but then that's not a stand, you know, were never in isolation very much, so all these other influences, and then I followed some of those things over into, so I kind of based it on my own experience, my own background being German American, you know, what things did I think I already knew about, and then
Yeah.
traced them back.
Yeah, and I should say that I think one of the really cool things about this being a book where lots of the recipes can be made out of pantry items is, and anyone who's ever had any German baking for Christmas knows, like, depending on how you proportion those spices, things can taste
Mhm.
really different. I finally got my grandmother's applesauce cake recipe, which I'd never been in, it didn't taste like anything I'd ever known. And when I finally got a hold of it, it didn't have any cinnamon in it. It was primarily allspice was the
Uh-huh.
was the spice used. And now it makes sense to me. But I think if you are really used to cinnamon forward baking, like if you have mace and you're not sure how to use it, the only other recipe I have for mace is like a lemon mace cookie that I have.
And because
This,
mace does have a lemony taste.
yeah, and it
Mhm.
really works well. But like mace, if you've got to get some of these things for one baking project, this book will help you use up so many of those spices before they get sad and powdery. Um,
Yes. Mhm.
because normally you're like, here's a tablespoon of cinnamon, and then like grate a little bit of a nutmeg and all this kind of stuff. I will say the Indian grocery store is the place to go
That's, yes.
stock up for this
Shout
book.
out to the
Yeah.
Bhavani Cash and Carry on Route 22, New
Yep.
Jersey. That's where I get my stuff. It's cheaper, and they
Yep.
have more stuff. They have stuff that is not at the regular grocery store.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
speaking of stuff that you can't get, in the Middle Ages, they actually had more spices than we have.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's a cool little kind of last chapter where you talk about all of the spices that have been in the book. But so what are some of the ones I noticed them that we can't,
well,
we
like
aren't familiar with?
Meligetta, you're not going to find Meligetta on the spice rack in the grocery
Hmm.
store, but you might be able to find it at an African food store.
Hmm.
because it's Nigerian spice and they still use it in Nigerian cooking. Let's see, I'll peek at my own book. What are some others? The galangal. They have different kinds of ginger.
Yep, and
Gal
galangal I know you can often get if you're from the Hartford area, you can go to Adong and you can get it in the freezer in the bag.
oh, what's
Totally
Adong?
fresh.
Is
Oh,
that
it's
a
just a local Thai and Vietnamese grocery store that we
Oh,
have.
cool. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
grocery stores. I delved a little bit into the history of grocery stores. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, he worked in the A&P bakery in
Oh,
the,
cool.
early 20th century. So yeah, I love just and like I don't know do most people know the A&P stands for or stood for uh Atlantic and Pacific
Atlantic and Pacific.
Company.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just like Edeka is a German chain, which is EDK, and I can't remember what it stood for now, but I think the K was Kolonialwaren. My mother remembers going to the Kolonialwarenladen, the colonial goods
Good store.
store. Yeah, where
Yeah.
you would get stuff that they got from the what had been the German African colonies.
Oh, yeah.
So
So that's interesting that like within if the colonial history of some of these things has been forgotten, in some cases it's sort of like this has been forgotten within a generation. That these many of
mhm.
these persisted much longer than we would tend to think about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
don't be afraid to go to the grocery store. And if you don't want to bake, it's okay not to bake. Go to the
mhm,
grocery store and just buy wisely. Like I talk about the different brands of fruitcake in
mhm,
this. Because that is also in the Middle Ages, people did not bake in the cities. They didn't bake at home because baking at home, A, was a fire hazard, B, was
mhm.
expensive, and you just didn't have an oven. So you would either buy the things already made, or if you really wanted to, you would bake something and then carry it down. You would put it together and then take it to the communal oven or the bakehouse. And even
Mhm.
after World War II, my mother remembers her mother assembling a cake and then going and getting in line, or my mother getting in line with it at the bakery, and you wait for your turn for it to be put in the oven with everybody else's.
That's
So it's
amazing.
okay. It's okay to buy stuff. Don't feel bad, but so you can buy a fruit cake. You can please buy a Stollen that's from Germany. Don't buy something that's got candied cherry and lime peel in it, candied citron. Buy it and then bring it to the table, and then you can tell everybody about the history, and that's just as good as
Yeah,
baking itself.
absolutely. There's enough in here to make you a real conversation star
I
at
hope
a
so.
at a dinner. There's just so many. I'm already thinking about for future trivia events at the museum. How many things I
I
can
think
pull
I
out of
think
this book.
a really fun game would be for somebody to mention, like say vanilla, and then who can say where it comes from originally.
Hmm.
Because I thought vanilla was from India before I started
Hmm.
this book. It's from Mexico and Central America.
Yeah, and then we now most often see ones that are sort of, ooh, it's Madagascar vanilla,
But
but
yes, but it's not originally from there.
yeah, yeah, it's so good. So there's a thousand other wonderful things in this book. Um, get it for yourself for a gift.
Yeah.
You sure give it to somebody else, but get it for yourself and enjoy it. So Shelley had a question in the Q&A. She said, have you discovered any recipes that use fir trees such as balsam tips or white pine?
No, I did have a friend gave me some fir needle tea,
Hmm.
and I did drink some, and I also put it in soap because I make soap, and I made a very nice fir needle soap with it. I would be very interested to see a fir needle. What could I wonder if you could use it like with as rosemary.
Rosemary, yeah.
Yeah, because rosemary has that piney,
Pine. Yeah.
camphory. Yeah,
Yep.
that'd
Would
be
be,
intriguing.
yeah. Other questions, feel free. I mean, I kind of didn't mention a ton of the crafts in here, but there's a lot of cool paper crafts in this book as well. Um, both some for amusement and some for kind of serving um, some
Mhm.
of the recipes
Just
that are,
if you're giving stuff away, you can make it look extra
yeah,
nice.
but nothing in here was beyond my craft abilities. So everybody at work
Okay.
knows about where that is. Um, other questions and thoughts. I don't know. Do you know off the top of your head how many recipes are in
Um,
this book?
my original working title, I think, was Mummies, Tarts, and Harpies: The Secret History of Christmas Baking in 12 recipes. It's a lot more than 12. I think it's over 40, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know myself.
I mean that's it. It would be hard for me to where is it shelved in a bookstore? It's shelved with nonfiction history, or is it put in
I would,
cooking
well, I don't know where it's
as
shelved
a
in the
cookbook?
bookstore. In the library, that's a good question because the library where I work, they bought a copy. It went out through interlibrary loan on last week. I don't know if it's 300s or 600s. The 300s is like folklore, and 641 is baking. I imagine it's in baking. That's a
Yeah.
good question that I should have thought to ask because I work in a library and I wrote the darn book. I don't know.
I mean, and that's what I think it's like if you're a person who likes reading cookbooks, like to read, which is kind of the kind of person I am, this is
Mhm.
your absolute dream here. Someone did ask in the Q&A, and I'd love to know the answer. Marilyn asked the story behind the book cover art, which she said is
Oh,
wonderful. And I
oh,
agree.
so
It's
yes.
so fun.
So they asked my editor, usually they ask me, what kind of book cover do you want? And I tell them very specifically, and then they don't do that at all. But this time, so they said, send us some pictures. And I sent like an Egyptian wall painting. I thought that would be cool because Egyptian tomb paintings, there's usually a lot of busy people doing, and like there's some baking
Carrying
scenes.
grains and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, carrying grains and taking breads out of earthen ovens. So that was one thought. And then I also sent them, I said, could it be something like there's a book called The Time Traveler's Guide to 13th Century England. And that has a busy illuminated style cover. And I also said, could it please make it less Tasha Tudor and more greedy peasant?
Yeah.
Tasha Tudor's in New England. Is she famous up there?
Yep.
Are you familiar with
Absolutely.
Tasha? Yeah, it's like very sweet, very pretty. And then Greedy
Her
Peasant is
Christmas book is over on my bookshelf right there to
okay then.
enjoy.
Okay then.
Yep.
And then the Greedy Peasant is um he's kind of like the darker crazy side of everything that's medieval. So they really got it. And I love it. I really love it. I got to give credit where credit is due. So the design was by Cassie Willett at the art department at Llewellyn Books, and the illustration by Nicole Raskin. And she carries it through, like you'll see one of those bored looking angels reflected in a glass of milk in one of the illustrations.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
I think that, yeah, you got to really look close. My favorite is the chicken. There's a chicken with a gingerbread man riding on her back. She is running away and she's laying eggs at the same time. The eggs have human faces, and then you
Yep.
get to a cat with a hot mitt on his head has broken one of the eggs.
Yep.
And
And the face looks real sad.
and then there's a figure behind who's looking at the cat, looking upset at the cat. This figure has just taken a stack of gingerbread men out of the oven. And it looks like I said I wanted St. Maurice to be on the cover. And
Mhm.
I sent my editor the statue of St. Maurice at Magdeburg Cathedral, which I mentioned in the book. And so there's St. Maurice. He's got dark skin. He's in his chainmail. He's also wearing an apron, and he obviously has boobs. So
I saw that.
is
Yeah.
this Saint Maurice in drag, or is this maybe Saint Catherine of Alexandria, who's tied to another kind of Lebkuchen, dressed as a knight? We don't know,
And I
but
will
I
just
love
say
it.
it was another bit I was reading out loud to my coworkers this afternoon. Um, your conversation around St. Catherine in the book is really hilarious and well done. I will say what this makes me think of is the medieval illuminations in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's
That too.
that's what this is,
Yes, that too.
and it's really wonderful. My favorite is the lady, the little hen with a human face sitting up on the top of the sea.
Oh yeah, the harpy.
The
Yeah,
harpy.
the
Yeah,
harpy,
yeah.
because the Harpies have their own section
Yep.
in there too.
Yep. It's really fun. And Shelley did just put in the Q&A, not a question, but I'll share it. Please consider promoting Linda's other book titles, such as The Old Magic of Christmas. They are all wonderful and full of
Oh,
interesting information.
thanks,
Um,
Shelley.
so it's just such a fascinating, fun book and and kind of well broken up into small, coherent chapters that you can kind of dip in and out of.
That was a
Um,
challenge. That was a challenge. Like where, where do I stop one subject and
yep.
start another? And yeah.
But you usually end every chapter with a good stinger. There's
I try.
You
Mhm.
come through a lot in the book, which I think is the best thing you can have in a cookbook.
Well,
Is
I interviewed some friends and acquaintances, not all of whom are Christian, not all of whom celebrate Christmas, but
Mhm.
their own takes on Christmas memories. Like Nev March, she's a mystery novelist, and she remembers Christmas growing up in Bombay. And yeah, so I just kind of spent the year asking everybody, do you bake anything for Christmas? What do you like at Christmas? Do you have any Christmas
Mhm.
memories? And so I'm really grateful for them for lending their stories too.
Yeah, it's excellent. Well, any last questions from the peanut gallery? That's one thing that's not really in anything here. If you are not a person who loves chocolate, this is a great book. There's some cocoa in here in places, but this is a really different set of ingredients that make most of these.
And there's things you can put chocolate on if you want to.
Mhm. If you want to. But I did notice that when some some recipe had some chocolate or some cocoa, and it made me sort of realize, oh, I haven't seen much of that in here. Well, the marzipan
Yeah.
potatoes obviously have cocoa, but
Mm-hmm.
uh,
The pan forte has cocoa in it.
mhm. So yeah, I can't recommend this enough. I mean, I think I responded when Omar said, we have some books coming up. Is anyone interested in any of these? I'm very glad I was sitting at my desk because I think I responded inside of 60 seconds to say, yes,
Oh,
please,
nice.
I would
Mm-hmm.
like to do this book. And the other nice thing about this, and you may be thinking, oh, well, it's kind of late for Christmas. Well, number one,
Really?
you're going to want to experiment with these so that next year your strokey or whatever is the most perfect
Mm-hmm.
little lumpy bun
Well,
ever.
the Sroki is for January 25th.
Ex well,
You've got
exactly.
plenty of time.
You've got
That's for the
time.
bird's wedding.
The Coptic stuff is for January 7th. And in fact, what's really great about this is that this is kind of like there's lots of year-round baking stuff in here. And this has made me kind of reevaluate when why do I save some of these things for certain times of the year? Um, there's it's it's in New England. It's going to be gross and cold until April at least. I can
Well,
bake lots of these things.
I don't really condone baking Christmas things when it's not Christmas time.
Well, but would you allow gingerbread?
Gingerbread, yes, because gingerbread has been Halloween. Gingerbread used to be just
Yeah,
like just the any fancy occasion kind
yeah.
of food. But you want to, I think certain smells and tastes, you want them welded to Christmas. Because
Hmm.
when you like once a year, it's only special then. And like when you smell those things baking, oh, okay, it's Christmas time now.
Hmm. Well, I will not tell you when I bake one of these things in
Okay.
February because
But I
I'm
mean,
probably going to.
a soft gingerbread is good any time of year.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff in here that I think will be good any time of year. And you can I'm a candy corn supporter. If you are too, you can eat it and know and grumble. Oh, the Christmas candy's coming out especially early this year when they put it out in August.
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, I just want to thank you again, Linda. This has been a really fun chat. I really enjoyed reading this book. I saw some folks in the chat were already interested in purchasing it. I can't recommend it enough. I will be getting it for several people for Christmas. I thought about just loaning them the copy I got, but I don't want it to never get returned to me.
Right.
I'm gonna buy
And it
several
might
copies.
get splatters on it from baking.
I mean, it already has marks from places I've been like, let's put a good crease in here so I don't lose this spot when I don't have
Oh, you're a corner folder.
if anything, I'm a page number rememberer, which is even less
Okay.
reliable. The
Well,
number
but
of
at least
times
it doesn't.
I've gone back and been like, where are those fun buns? Where this is where my book opens too now. So, well, thank you so much for joining us to talk through this book. It's been a real treat, and thanks to everybody who joined us on this nice. Is it cold today? It is actually cold today,
Cold here,
December.
yeah.
Yeah, it was 60 something. Yes. So awesome. And I think we have a Omar, do we have any programs coming up? I think we might have maybe one more this week.
Yeah, well, we have another Christmas or holiday themed program on Thursday. It's also a virtual program, and it'll be at 3 p.m., which is not our usual time. So just remember it'll be 3 p.m. On Thursday, and that will be about Christmas lore. Not the usual Christmas lore, kind of a little spooky. So come and join us for that as well.
Awesome. Excellent. For all of those of you who asked for ghost Christmas tours this year, that's your event.
And come visit us at the house. We'll have the decorations up until January 1st or 2nd, right? Right, Aaron?
Yep, they come down the second, but you can see what Christmas baking is taking place in the Clemens' kitchen right now. I had to do the kitchen redress this year. So come see what we're baking in the kitchen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Linda.